So the program will be a bit different today. So we will start with the two presentations first, and each of them will talk for about 30 minutes. And then afterwards, there's a very short break, but don't run away because we will have a discussion afterwards for the two papers together. So let me first introduce you to Caroline, who will introduce Maurits Meijers.
Thank you, Sylvia. It's very nice to see such an attendance today. We know it's June, it's exam session. Lots of people have different things to do, so it's very nice, and I thank everyone who is present today. So as Sylvia said, Maurits Meijers is research professor of political science at the University of Antwerp. Previously, he worked as an associate professor at Radboud University. I also know Maurits as the co-editor-in-chief of the journal Politics of the Low Country. So if you want to submit a paper, you can discuss that after the seminar. And Maurits' current research examines how representative democracy comes under pressure from political lying, populism, and party behavior, and how citizens and elites respond. He is the principal investigator of Demo Lies, an ERC-funded project studying political lying accusations, how citizens perceive them, and what they mean for democratic citizenship across Western democracies. Congratulations on the ERC, by the way. Come on.
All right. Thank you, Caroline, for this nice introduction. So today I will talk about political lying as a concept and what that means for democracy. So the title is "Lies, Damned Lies, and Politics," as a pun on the famous quote, "How citizens make sense of political deception and what it means for democracy." And this is a joint work with Marta Verdegem, Simon McManus, Tom Bellens, and Daniel Polman. The last of whom is at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. So when we talk about lies in politics, you will likely think of examples like this. Trump's claim that he had the highest turnout ever for his 2017 inauguration. Very recently in Flanders, it was shown that Annelien van Bossuit did know that she had to pay dwangsommen, a fine, and that she misled Parliament knowingly. In the Netherlands, we had the case that the government, not the previous government, the government before that fell because of disagreement over immigration, which was based on information that in the end turned out to not be true, and she knowingly spread this information. And then we have Boris Johnson's claim that that anyone who thinks I lied about lockdown parties is out of their mind, after which footage was shown that he was actually there. So these are kind of these classic cases what we think of political lying. However, when we ask citizens to identify what they see as cases of political lying, a very different picture emerges, and that's exactly what I want to talk to you about. So, for instance, and I will come to that, I did focus group discussions with people in Antwerp, and one N-VA voter said, well, a real case of lying for me is that in 2014, the N-VA entered the federal government, because they were for independent Flanders. That's why I voted for them. And they did something else. So that's a lie to their voters. Other participants said, also in the Flemish context, these are quotes by Conrad Rousseau, which I will not repeat. They are extremely sexist and racist. And they said, for me, it's a lie when a person who is supposed to be part of a progressive party, the leader of a progressive party, then says things that are completely at odds with that ideology. So his leadership as such is a lie. And that's the puzzle, and that's kind of this insight that I want to start with and unpack further today. So what is true or not is as old as politics itself, right? So we have all these nice historical accounts in ancient Greece where also their deception and framing was used to lead and mislead the public. But today we have often said and heard that we live in an age of disinformation and in a post-truth society where all of this becomes more and more relevant. And well, when we think about lying in politics, there's not a lot of research done about this. So sure, in psychology and in communication science, there's a lot of research about fake news, misinformation, disinformation, also health disinformation, and then within this context, okay, when do people accept fake news messages? When do they reject it? How can we inoculate people against this? Or how can we train them to reject fake news? So there's a lot of great and important research done in that regard. But what is always kind of clear in this, or taken as a given in this research, is that what is true and what isn't. And my take on this is that, well, it's a bit of a problem that we pay so little attention to citizens' perceptions of lying, or if we turn it on its head, citizens' perception of what is true and what is not true. Because what is a lie and what is not a lie is a deeply political act. And we can think of truth and lies, or truth and falsehoods as this balanced scales, whereas actually there is an objective truth. And that is important, but if we take the citizen's perspective seriously, we kind of also have to step away from that a little bit to appreciate that what is true and what is not true is contested, and that it's empirically relevant to study it. So that doesn't mean that there is no truth, embracing kind of this post-truth idea. No, sure, there is truth, but to understand why people say certain things are lies and certain things are not lies, we have to kind of step away from this fact, okay, from this standard of this is true, and we're going to test how people respond to fake or messages that deviate from that, and see what do citizens themselves perceive to be true and not true. So that is the research gap that I want to address in this project. So how do citizens make sense of political lying, and how does it affect their democratic attitudes? And specifically, it's unclear what citizens perceive to be political lies in the first place, which citizens and which types of citizens see more lies than others, and how it affects their democracy. So the question here is really, the focus is really on citizens' perceptions of lying, and it's not a question of ontology, right? In philosophy, we can study what is true and what is there, and these are all important things, but that's not the focus. It's also not the focus is not on fact-checking on how people relate to some kind of objective standard. So this project is funded in two ways. So we have the Politics is Monkey Business project, which was funded by the Dutch Science Council already a while ago, but still kind of the research, the funding is stopped, but the research is still ongoing, in which I am the PI and work together with Daniel Polman, and the ERC project that Caroline mentioned, which started last year, which is a slightly broader project, which is about political lying accusations, also on elite level, studying how elites accuse each other of lying, kind of this question of truth contestation at elite level, and then studying how citizens perceive this. So, what will I talk about today? So first, I will talk a little bit about defining political lies from a kind of a conceptual point of view and the citizen perspective on that. Then I say who sees which, I'll talk about who sees which political lies, and then what does that mean for democracy. So, starting with the conceptual question, the question is, okay, what is a lie and what is a political lie? And you would kind of think, oh, isn't that obvious? Anything that's not true is a lie. Well, as things are, if you delve more deeply in research, everything is more complicated than it seems, because actually this is a question that's been studied quite extensively in applied philosophy and in linguistics. For instance, this very nice book from the 1980s by Sisela Bock. This discusses what lying is and also the historical writings around it. So lying is a contested concept, but we borrow from Mr. Meijers, who is featured here, and he basically outlines 4 conditions. So the first condition is that it needs to be a statement. So lying is essentially a linguistic act. So you can do something that is deceptive, but it needs to be a linguistic act for it to count as a lie, which of course excludes many other concepts. Then there's the untruthfulness condition, which, and this is quite crucial, the speaker who speaks the lie has to believe it's false. Right? So it might actually be true what the person is saying if it turns out to be true, but the speaker has to think it's false. Then it needs to be addressed to someone. If you say, if you lie to yourself in the mirror, sure, but that's not a lie. There needs to be an addressee. And the last point is a point of some contestation, but most people say, well, there has to be an intention to deceive. And also there's a very rich literature between people who believe that, the deceptionists and the non-deceptionists, and we can talk about that later if you're interested. So this is a very interesting and rich conceptual literature. But most people adhere to this idea that, okay, that you have to kind of have the intention to deceive others. Well, what makes it political? This literature is markedly smaller, so there's a lot of literature on lying. Political lying is really not studied conceptually a lot, but it has to be some kind of politically relevant actor, a broad public audience in the public domain, so not private. If we think about the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal, for instance, that's of course a private affair that then became public and politically salient. So first, perhaps the lie was to his wife. Well, then it's a private affair, but then once it enters the public domain, it's not private. And then also the lie is then also for political benefit. So again, it's not private gain, but for political benefit, although, of course, that can also be kind of contested. So there's a lot of concepts surrounding political lies that are interesting and relevant, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's important to note that conceptually there are differences. So misinformation, the important difference there is that there's no necessarily belief, does not need to be believed to be false, and actually the intention to deceive is also should not be there, this check mark. So this can be a mistake. That's misinformation. Political disinformation then is a broader term where we can also have non-linguistic acts and deep fakes and all of these things. And also it does not have to be false, right? You can frame something in a certain way to mislead that is not, according to the strict definition, not necessarily a lie, but you paint reality in such a picture, or you frame it in such a way that it's not, that you still convey a misleading message. Well, fake news, this is often studied in a media context. And then political bullshit is an interesting one because there, it's addressed to the public, but it does not have to be false. Political bullshit is this disregard for the truth. You don't care if something is true or not. And actually, I think if we look at Trump, a lot of the things he's saying might be lies, but there can also be a lot of bullshit. He doesn't care whether what he says is true or not. It's just kind of a disregard for the truth. No deliberate intention to mislead or to deceive, but no care about that. Okay, so that's this conceptual literature. How do citizens then think about this? So what we did is we did focus groups, and I will share with you some very preliminary evidence from focus groups where we had discussions with citizens and also vignettes of different examples where we were manipulating these different elements of the definition to see what they find important. So we did these focus groups in the University of Antwerp at the Antwerp Social Lab, which is a great resource. And we will do additional focus groups in Bristol, actually in the UK, later this year. So so far we've spoken to about 15 people with a balanced sample of in terms of education, ideology, and gender. People were slightly more higher educated, also due to, and politically interested due to the recruitment through the Antwerp M2P panel. But so far it's been a very interesting and rewarding experience. And so what is kind of is very interesting that we can see there are two types. And this is preliminary because more focus groups have been done this week. And I haven't integrated that yet. But so there is one group who are kind of purists who stay very close to this definition that I just shared with you, who say, well, you need to be an active false statement is necessary. If you evade a question, or if you don't answer a question, or if you omit some details, that is not a lie. If there's no intent per se, it's also not a lie if you make a mistake or if you forget, and it's really a very strict kind of focus on the claim. Contextualists, this is this other group that I identify, is it's like if it's somehow misleading, it's a kind of lying. And omissions or spinning is also a form of lying. Anything that kind of deviates from full transparency is a lie. And the intent is often kind of inferred because they are politicians, and it's very much focused on the speaker. And among these contextualists, you also see how important political trust is, because those who have low trust say, well, all of this confirms my view on politicians. My trust is completely gone. And a lot of the examples that we saw also went in this direction. Those with high trust, they say, well, selective framing is not necessarily misleading. It is actually leading. That is the core, the essence of politics, to frame and to bring people on side. So that's just someone with relatively high trust, right? So you can see both are kind of contextualists in how they use this definition, but the high trust allows them to have a different take on that. What is very interesting, though, also is that there's that all broken promises, like the one NVA example I discussed in the beginning, are seen as lies. And this is really interesting. Kind of any electoral pledge or promise that is made that is not fulfilled is seen as lies by all these participants, which I thought was quite surprising, because you would think, well, coalition politics, and you make a promise, and not everything can be held up. But no, people say, well, if you make a promise, you commit to it. And in Dutch and Flemish, you have the saying, belofte maakt schuld, which is hard to translate, but kind of basically a promise is a promise made is a debt owned, right? So if you make a promise, you're indebted to the one you said it to, and that's really interesting. But there's of course a kind of a strange temporal dimension here, because when you promise something that is not a lie, it's only when it turns out that you didn't do it that it becomes a lie. So you also see that people do not always have a clear, consistent view on this definition. Okay, so this is preliminary work that I wanted to share with you. I'm very interested to hear what you think about that. I'll go to this other part of the talk, which is about who sees which political lies. And here I rely on very different methods, which is this kind of inductive way of studying people's perceptions of lies at a larger scale quantitatively. So we use here experiencing sampling, the experience sampling method, also known as panel diary studies, which is not often used in political science, but basically it's an app on your phone where you get a notification, hey, can you tell me about your day? And this is used a lot in food research, for instance. When they enter the supermarket, they get a message, what are you buying? How are you feeling? But this is really nice for our purposes as well, because you can capture attitudes in the moment. You can link attitudes to real-world events, and it really can look at these short-term dynamics in opinion. And it allows within-person analysis, because you can compare between weeks a person who's answered different times. So a diary study. So we did this with 900 citizens in a representative sample in the Netherlands. We had a baseline and an exit measurement and 12 weeks of short surveys where people were able to log any lie that they saw, right? Of course, there is a bit of priming there because we said the survey is about lies that you identify, so that is something you have to take into account. But people were weekly reminded, hey, can you log whatever you saw? And if people saw no lies, that's fine. And if they did see a lie, they got follow-up questions about the content and the speaker of the lie. And they could also spontaneously log some lies. So if we look descriptively, in these 12 weeks, over the 900 respondents, we had 2,800 lies reported in total, which is a lot and way more than I expected. We also see that there's an outlier there with about 60 lies. So he's very active. If we look, if we make that sample shorter, the mean stays quite the same. So, well, what happened in this period in Dutch politics? It was actually quite an interesting time. So there was protests so first actually there were riots in Amsterdam after Maccabi Tel Aviv football fans from the Israeli team Maccabi Tel Aviv came to Amsterdam and then were attacked by citizens in the Netherlands. That sparked a debate about integration and immigration and about anti-Semitism. Related to that was that the state secretary resigned of Moroccan descent over alleged racism and discrimination in the Minister Council. There was also an education protest. There was a discussion about energy and gas, and there was an energy and a climate ruling as well. So this is the period. And if we look at what did people actually say, what types of examples, I put the English examples here. So you see that again, here many people have a rather broad view on what a lie is. So the first one is about this Amsterdam riots, so the mayor of Amsterdam supposedly said nothing is going on and yet riots are breaking out. They did misclassify the party of the mayor of Amsterdam, but that's... Or, for instance, the VVD says the best cure against that the VVD is the best cure against populism, but they are populists themselves. That is a contradiction. That is a lie. But a more kind of concrete way is about the minister of mobility and transportation, and he increased the speed limit, and he lied about the distance because it's only 46 kilometers, and he said it was longer. So that's kind of a more factual. But also more ideological ones, for instance, about that there was anti-Jewish hatred, and this is caused by refugees who've been allowed in by the left-wing parties. That is something that the respondents saw as a lie on the part of geert Wilders. Now, if we look at the issue areas that were most important here on the left, you see that civil rights and immigration and government operations, these were the most often categories that appeared most often, and this is civil rights has to do with anti-Semitism, racism, discrimination. Immigration stands for itself, and government operations in this case was always the state secretary resigning, where people from both sides said, hey, there's something going on. Now, if you look at left-right, so left-wing respondents and right-wing respondents, we see actually that most right-wing respondents speak more about all these issues on the right-hand side, so defense, education, personal conduct. This is mostly about a specific politician. And on the left, it's about health and culture, but a lot of the most salient issues are actually shared by both. So there's not a clear political angle there. And also here, it's interesting to see if the respondent is on the left-wing respondent, they're in the left column, or a right-wing respondent in the right column. The parties most mentioned as liars are the same, and these are the government parties, right? So with the far-right populist PVV standing out for both right-wing and respondents and left-wing and centrist respondents. So that's quite interesting. So, okay, what then explains on the citizen level what this variation in the perceptions that politicians are lying? We did a binomial regression with these different variables, and I will walk you through the results. So what we find is that having low trust at the beginning of the survey, in this baseline survey, is a predictor of seeing more lies. High trust, less lies. So trust is a key factor that we also saw in the focus groups. Populism and populist attitudes also had an effect. However, when we control for trust, this goes away. We see that right-wing people see more lies, or left-wing people see fewer lies, and politically interested people see more lies. And also with respect to with education, it's middle-educated people compared to low-educated people or vocationally trained people that see a little bit more lies, and there is no real effect of gender and age. Okay, so this paints a picture, right? So we see who are the ones that see these lies and log these lies. These are the people are more right-wing, slightly more right-wing. They're more politically interested, and they have low trust. I think those are key. So now I'll turn to the last question of my talk. Is that, okay, well, what does this all mean for democracy and democratic attitudes? And so what this panel diary setup allows us to do is to study people's trust in politicians and satisfaction with democracy in a way that on a week-by-week basis, right? So we ask people, did you see a lie, yes or no? And we always ask people, what is your satisfaction with democracy? What is your trust in politicians? So that's what we did. We did a panel regression model with the independent variable being whether you saw a lie or not in that week, and also how many lies did you report, right? So we have two measures. Starting with trust, we see there's a clear negative effect, right? So having seen a lie has a quite sizable negative effect on trust. Trust is measured on a 0 to 10 scale, so 0.6 effect is quite sizable. And for satisfaction with democracy, is very similar type of effect, right? So we see that people who report lies then also are less satisfied with democracy and less trusting of politicians compared to people who did not report a lie in a given week. Now, if we zoom in on those that did have a lie, did see a lie, are there then kind of characteristics of the lie and of the liar that matter? And interestingly, I really thought, okay, it's because you have this whole literature about motivated reasoning, that it's all about party politics. You think the opponents are lying, and your party is not. But we saw already earlier in this descriptive evidence that it's not really the case. And also here, party sympathy, how sympathetic you find the party that the liar belonged to, did not have an effect, both in terms of trust in the party and trust in the politician. Also, how distanced ideologically you are as a respondent also did not really matter. What we did see is that, okay, well, if you think this lie is somehow acceptable, because we already saw that sometimes people say, well, this is actually quite acceptable. Sometimes it's also leading, it's not always misleading, but leading in the focus groups. And so some people also said some lies are more justifiable and more acceptable, and that garners more trust in the liar, which is relevant insofar that you see, well, actually we do capture something that is relevant in trust in party. So this, for me, that informs me that this party sympathy, the lack of a party sympathy and a left-right difference effect are important conclusions that we can draw. All right. So I'm going to wrap up now. And so my case for you today here is that we need to study political lying in its own right. It's a political act to identify what is true and what is not true. Fact checks are important, and it's great that media do this. And studies about disinformation calculation is also important, but we need to understand more what do people think are lies, and also how egregious is this. Also, we see that this phenomenon of political lying and identifying lies is a bit broader than literature, than what we see from the literature in conspiracy beliefs or populist attitudes, right? So there's a portion of the population that adheres to conspiracy belief, but it's a minority. But we see here that really quite a lot of people logged lies. And also with respect to populist attitudes, more people have populist attitudes than vote for populist parties, but still this phenomenon seems to be quite broad, and it's also not explained by that. The understanding that citizens have of political lying is rather broad and also very diverse, and there's more for us to unpack there. I've shared some preliminary focus group evidence, but there's definitely something we want to understand better in the future. And yeah, we see that governing parties are often accused of lying. Of course, they're also the most present, most salient in the media. And ideology does not play as much as a role as we thought. And we see, and that's the big conclusion, is that trust is a kind of a key variable. Low trusting citizens have this more broader contextualist understanding of political lying, and they see anything that deviates from full transparency as a lie. They also report more lies in the quantitative study, and it also has a negative, seeing a lie has a negative effect again on lying, which makes this a kind of a vicious circle, right? And the nice thing about this data is that we can say, well, it's not a circular argument that we're making because we have a baseline measure of trust and then number of lies, as well as this panel setup where we see that seeing a lie garners less trust. So what are the next steps in this project? So we're going to do focus groups in the UK. Also, one of the PhD students is going to do a study about comparing kind of lying to other bad behavior, uncivil behavior politicians can do. What is more egregious? How bad is it? We're going to do cross-sectional surveys in 6 countries, European countries, including the US as well, on kind of perceived lying frequency. How bad is this in democracy? Is this a problem? And then something I didn't speak about today at all is this big part of the project, which is about the elite level, where we map accusations of lying between elites and try to understand why accusations happen and whether this has increased indeed or not. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.